In the laws of physics, matter cannot simply cease to exist. An object cannot be in one place and then, a moment later, be absolutely nowhere. But on April 1st, 2006, the laws of physics seemed to break inside a bar in Columbus, Ohio. A 27-year-old medical student named Brian Schaefer walked into a bar called the Ugly Tuna Saloon. He was seen by friends, he was seen by staff, he was captured on high-definition security cameras entering the building, but he never walked out. He didn't leave through the front door. He didn't leave through the back. He didn't leave through the emergency exit. Police searched the walls, the vents, the sewers, and the construction site next door. There was no body, no blood, no footprints. He simply evaporated. This is the story of America's most baffling locked room mystery. To understand the tragedy of this disappearance, we first have to understand the man. In 2006, Brian Schaefer was the definition of an American success story. He was 27 years old, handsome, charming, and highly intelligent. He had already earned a degree in microbiology and was currently in his second year of medical school at Ohio State University. He was the kind of guy who seemed to have it all figured out. He was deeply in love with his girlfriend, Alexis Wagoner, who was also a medical student. In fact, the two of them had a romantic trip to Miami scheduled for the very next Monday. Rumor had it Brian was planning to propose to her on that trip. Life for Brian Schaefer was moving in one direction, up. But beneath the surface of this perfect life, there was a crack. Just 3 weeks before that night in April, Brian's mother, Renee, passed away from a rare form of bone cancer. Brian was incredibly close with his mother. Her death shattered him. Friends said that while he was putting on a brave face, going to classes and smiling for photos, inside he was struggling. He was exhausted, grieving, and desperate for a break. That break was supposed to be Friday, March 31st. It was the beginning of spring break for the medical school. Exams were over. The pressure was off. Despite his grief, Brian decided to go out. He wanted to blow off steam. He wanted to feel normal again. The evening began with a steak dinner with his father, Randy Schaefer. It was a routine, pleasant meal. Brian looked tired, but he was in good spirits. At the end of dinner, Brian hugged his father and told him he loved him. Randy Schaefer had no idea that those would be the last words he would ever hear his son speak. After dinner, Brian met up with his best friend, William or Clint Florence. They began bar hopping through the short North District of Columbus, drinking hard and celebrating the start of their vacation. By the time they reached their final destination, it was past midnight. They headed to the South Campus Gateway Complex, a modern entertainment hub near the university. Their destination was a bar on the second floor, the Ugly Tuna Saloon. This specific location is critical to the mystery. To get into the Ugly Tuna, you had to ride an escalator up from the street level. At the top of that escalator, you walked through the main entrance. Crucially, there was a security camera positioned directly above the escalator. It was motion-activated, panning left and right, capturing everyone who entered and everyone who left. It is roughly 1:15 a.m. on April 1st when Brian and Clint arrive at the Ugly Tuna. They meet up with another friend, Meredith Reed. We can see them on the security footage. Brian is wearing a green polo shirt with a long-sleeved white shirt underneath. He looks a little unsteady, perhaps a bit drunk, but he is functioning, he is talking, he is alive. Inside, the bar is chaotic. The band is finishing their set and hundreds of students are celebrating. At 2:55 a.m., just minutes before last call, Brian steps away from his friends. The camera catches Brian just outside the bar entrance, at the top of the escalator. He is seen chatting with two young women. He seems lucid. He's flirting or maybe just making conversation. After a brief chat, he waves goodbye to them. And then, Brian does something simple yet fateful. He turns around. He walks back through the doors, into the darkness of the Ugly Tuna Saloon. That moment, right there, is the last time Brian Schaefer was ever seen by human eyes or a camera lens. At 2 a.m., the lights come on. It's closing time. Security starts herding people out. Clint and Meredith are waiting by the escalator. They're looking for Brian.
They call his phone, but it goes straight to voicemail. They check the men's bathroom, but it's empty. They scan the crowd pouring down the escalator, but they don't see him. They assume what any of us would assume. He ditched them. Maybe he walked home to sleep it off. Maybe he met a girl. So Clint and Meredith leave. They wait outside on the street for a few minutes, but Brian never comes down. The next morning, Saturday, Brian doesn't call. Sunday passes in silence. Monday morning comes. The flight to Miami is scheduled to leave. Brian and Alexis are supposed to be on it. Alexis is at the airport, holding her ticket. She waits. She watches the gate, but the plane takes off without him. That is when everyone knew. This wasn't a hangover. This wasn't a joke. Brian Schaefer was missing.
The Columbus Police Department took the case seriously, largely because Brian was a responsible medical student with no history of running away. They did something unprecedented. They seized the surveillance footage from the Ugly Tuna Saloon and the surrounding businesses. Detectives sat down and manually counted every single person who entered the bar that night. Then they counted every single person who left. The math didn't add up. Everyone who went up that escalator came back down. Everyone except Brian. Police swept the building. They brought in cadaver dogs, canines trained to smell death. If Brian had been killed in a bar fight and stuffed in a closet, the dogs would know. If he had fallen into a ventilation shaft, the dogs would know. The dogs searched the bar. They searched the kitchen. They searched the construction site next door. Nothing. No scent of death. No scent of blood. Theories began to run wild. Some believed Brian, drunk and disoriented, might have wandered out a service door and fallen into wet cement or a foundation pit at the construction site nearby. Police took this so seriously that they actually used ground-penetrating radar on the concrete floors. The result was nothing. He wasn't in the walls. He wasn't in the floor. Then there was the service exit theory. Could he have slipped out the back? The service corridor led to a freight elevator that opened onto the ground floor. However, that exit was generally locked or guarded. And even if he did get out that way, he would have emerged into an alleyway covered by 3 other security cameras. None of those cameras saw him either. It was as if he evaporated the moment he stepped back inside the bar. In every disappearance, you look at the last person to see the victim alive. In this case, that scrutiny fell on Brian's best friend, Clint Florence. According to reports, Clint was not as cooperative as the Schaefer family hoped. While Meredith Reed sat for interviews and tried to help, Clint hired a lawyer almost immediately. Clint refused to take a polygraph test. Legally, that is his right, and many defense attorneys will tell you never to take a polygraph even if you are innocent. But to Brian's grieving father, Randy, this silence was deafening. Clint's lawyer stated that Clint told police everything he knew. They were drinking, they got separated, and that was it. Then there was the digital trail, or rather, the lack of one. Brian's bank account was untouched. His credit cards were never used. His car was still parked at his apartment. But there was one eerie electronic footprint: Brian's cell phone. For months after the disappearance, Alexis would call Brian's number just to hear his voice on the voicemail. Usually, it went straight to recording. But one night, months later, it rang. It rang 3 times. The signal pinged off a tower in Hilliard, Ohio, about 14 miles from the bar. Police rushed to the area, but they found nothing. Was it a glitch? Was Brian turning his phone on for a brief second? To this day, the ghost ping remains unexplained. The story of Brian Schaefer is not just about the man who vanished. It's about the man who was left behind. Brian's father, Randy, became a crusader. He spent his life savings hiring private investigators. He walked the riverbanks. He chased down psychic tips, no matter how crazy they sounded. He had lost his wife. Then he lost his son. He was a man with nothing left to lose but the truth. But the universe can be cruel. In September 2008, 2 years after Brian vanished, a heavy windstorm hit Ohio. Randy was outside his home, cleaning up debris. A heavy branch snapped from a tree. It struck Randy, killing him instantly. Neighbors found his body the next morning. Within days, a comment appeared on Randy's online obituary. It said, "To Dad, love, Brian, U.S. Virgin Islands." For a moment, hope flared. Was Brian alive? Was he hiding in the Caribbean? Police traced the IP address. It was a hoax, posted from a public library computer in Ohio by a cruel internet troll. Randy Schaefer died without ever knowing what happened to his son. He died holding on to the hope that Brian would walk through the door. So, nearly 20 years later, what are we left with? What actually happened in the ugly tuna saloona? There are three prevailing theories. The first is the walkaway. Some believe the grief over his mother was too much. Brian wanted out. He changed his clothes in the bar, perhaps wearing a hat or a different jacket he had stashed, kept his head down, and slipped past the cameras in the large crowd exiting at closing time. Did he start a new life? Is he a doctor in another country? It's a romantic idea, but leaving behind a loving fiancé and a medical career is hard to believe. The second theory is foul play inside the bar. This suggests Brian never left the bar alive. Was there an altercation? A bad drug deal? Was he killed inside and his body smuggled out days later in a trash bin or a beer keg? The bar was located in a rough area of town known for high crime. But again, there was no blood evidence and the cadaver dogs found nothing. The third theory involves the smiley face killers. This is the most controversial. Retired detectives have proposed that a group of serial killers targets college-aged men, drowns them, and leaves smiley face graffiti near the crime scenes. While many men have been found in the river in Columbus, Brian was never found in the water. This theory remains widely debated and officially debunked by the FBI, but internet sleuths refuse to let it go. The ugly tuna saloona eventually closed its doors. The space has been renovated. The cameras that watched Brian vanish are gone. But the question remains, how does a man walk into a room and never walk out? Is Brian Schaefer alive, living under a new name, watching this video right now? Or are his remains hidden somewhere in the concrete jungle of Columbus, Ohio, waiting to be found? The FBI has called this one of the strangest disappearances in American history, and until someone speaks, the mystery of the man who evaporated remains open.